In thinking about Shakespeare and sexuality, it's natural perhaps to start with Shakespeare himself. He was an early developer sexually. He married Anne Hathaway when he was only 18. This was very exceptional. Very few people, young men, married as young as that in Shakespeare's time. And of course, also, she was pregnant at the time he married her. Their first child was born only 6 months after the marriage. Now, that means he had committed a legal offence for which he could have been severely rebuked. In fact, in one of his plays, Measure for Measure, Claudio is condemned to death for premarital fornication, even though he's about to marry the woman who is having his child. Shakespeare's interest in sex and sexuality shows itself throughout his works, his poems and his plays. And it shows itself, I think, in interestingly developing ways. He gets a lot of fun out of sex. He knows that sex can be amusing, entertaining, exciting. He shows that particularly in his earlier comedies, such as The Two Gentlemen of Verona, for example, or Much Ado About Nothing, or Love's Labour's Lost. He's often very bawdy. There are some very rude passages in Shakespeare's plays. But also Shakespeare sees sex as an inevitable component of love. And Shakespeare was very much concerned, I think, with the part that sexuality plays in a love relationship. This comes out particularly in the sonnets. He's aware of the difference between lust and love. He's aware that sexual desire can be a destructive thing. The expense of spirit in the waste of shame is lust in action, he says in one of his sonnets. He writes about sex in a developing way. The earlier plays are more light-hearted about sexuality. In the middle plays, they're more intense. He's more concerned with the problems that sex arises. In Measure for Measure, for example, Angelo's lust for the nun, Isabella, is treated in a very seriously agonized way. All's Well That Ends Well also has similar questions behind it. In some of the plays, he even portrays a sort of revulsion against sex. In King Lear, Lear talks about women with sexual nausea. You get similar feelings in Troilus and Cressida, for example, and above all in Timon of Athens, where the disillusioned Timon takes it out on the whores who accompany him, who are seeking to get his money. Shakespeare is aware of prostitution. There are brothel scenes in the plays, in the history plays, above all in Pericles, the great scene where the chaste heroine, Marina, is sold into a brothel. He's very much concerned with the sort of moral problems that those things raise. Shakespeare is at his most personal about sex, as about everything indeed, in the sonnets. I myself believe, not everybody agrees with me, but I believe that Shakespeare's sonnets, many of them are written very much from his own heart, from his own personal experience. There we do see him, I think, writing about his own experience of love, of romantic love sometimes, but also of sexual love. Some of the sonnets also deal with sexuality in quite extraordinary explicit terms. One of the sonnets ends with lines which could be imagined as being spoken by the poet's penis, where he talks about rising and falling for the lady's pleasure. Shakespeare was not afraid of sexuality, of writing about sexuality, and he was willing to hope and expect his audiences would be able to accept frankness about it, whether in jokey ways, as often in the comedies, or in deeply serious ways, as in the sonnets, where he's writing sometimes it would appear from personal experience, or in King Lear, or in Timon of Athens, where you get a revulsion against sexuality, or in Hamlet, in, for example, the famous scene where Hamlet accuses his mother of lechery after she's married the second husband whom Hamlet so much detests. Shakespeare was not alone among the poets and dramatists of his time in writing about sexuality. Interestingly, he and Richard Barnfield, a poet of the 1590s, are the only two writers of the period who explicitly address sonnets to a male person. There's a degree of homoeroticism visible in Shakespeare, especially in the sonnets, but also possibly in the plays. Shakespeare's audiences could take this. They could take the sexuality with which he was concerned, and they could enjoy it. Some of them felt scruples against it, of course, and there's a lot of Puritan objection to drama on the grounds that it dealt in sexual themes, but nevertheless the audiences, I'm sure, revelled in it, and Shakespeare himself fed that desire for a frank treatment of sex.